I started playing Magic in 1994 when I was 9 years old. At that age, the game was about finding the cards that you loved and trying to make those cards the ones you build around. Now I'm much older and I know a lot more about the game, but now I can build decks using my heart and my brain. This is Magic the Gimmicking, where I take silly themes, concepts, or restrictions and turn them into powerful EDH decks. Hey everybody, it's me, MC Squared. We are back here at Zulu's Board Game Cafe, where we're going to be talking about our third installment of the Magic the Gimmicking series today. This is the show where I come up with weird and strange commander decks and turn them into successful decks that are totally playable at your regular commander table. They're not going to be CEDH competitive by any means, but they'll still be fun, interactive, and have a grand unifying theme. This time, we're going to be talking about a tribal deck, which is a very common deck style, and it's actually going to be a very common tribe as well, and that's dragons. Of course, we know dragons are a very popular monster, not even just among Magic players, just amongst people that enjoy fantasy concepts at all, typically really like dragons. Magic is no exception. Dragons are some of the most common, they're not the most common creatures, but they are found in almost every set and are very powerful creatures. But what's going to make this dragon tribal deck different from most of the other dragon tribal decks you see is I have put together a dragon tribal deck that does not include the color red. Now, if you're not inherently familiar with Magic, most dragons are red. Almost every dragon that's ever been printed has red in its color identity. There are, of course, not every single dragon, but most of them do. Well over 90% of the dragons that exist have red in their color identity. So we have a very limited pool to work with. So we're going to build this deck and have it still be successful while not relying on red. And I've put together a list that I think is very successful. I've had some good luck with it. It, takes a little bit of work to get going, and there's, of course, some key centerpieces. This is probably going to be a little bit shorter than some of the other videos because I'm really just going to go over the cards themselves that care about this being a non-red dragon deck rather than some of the other videos where I've gone over a lot more meticulous list of cards, because since this is still a tribal deck at its core, a lot of the core tribal staples are going to be necessary. So I'm not really going to go over what tribal cards are good. We're going to leave those to your knowledge and understanding or research if you haven't built a powerful tribal deck before. And I'm just going to start going over the cards that really matter to this style in particular. So the first thing we had to do is choose a commander. There were a couple of options open to me, and the first one I picked is the one that is the most powerful. And while the card itself is not red, it does still have red in its color identity, so it's kind of iffy for building this around. It did have to be every color that's not red to gain access to as many other dragons as possible. So in that spirit, the first commander I chose was Morophon. Morophon the Boundless, of course, the colorless changeling creature. It's basically the universal tribal commander for any tribe that folks want to try and build around, that is 5 colors, has access to everything. It is augments the creature types, makes creatures that type less expensive. Fantastic tribal commander for any type of deck you want to build. Of course, it's naturally a very good dragon commander anyway, especially for multicolor dragons, because there are so many dragons that have multicolor in them, but since so many still have red's of course in there. Now, for this, we won't be using any red cards, but red still exists in the color identity, so it's a little iffy when discussing whether or not the deck's truly non-red or not. So that's up to you. The option that I came up with for commanders that are actually not red is 2 of the partner commanders, one of the white-blue ones and one of the black-green ones, that are both Tarkir themed, so they still have connections to dragons, but not necessarily are dragons themselves, even though one of them does have dragon in the name. The first one is Ishai, Ojutai Dragon Speaker, and the other is Ikra Shadiki. They don't really synergize for tribal decks really well. They're perfectly fine on their own. Ishai will just, if it sticks to the board, becomes a very powerful flyer on its own, fine. And Ikra will gain you a lot of life inevitably by function of so many of the cards in the deck having large toughnesses in addition to their large powers. You'll gain some life, but it won't really have that synergy that you want out of a commander. So that's why I think I like Morophon better. The more I look at it, if you really want to stay away from red completely, Ishai and Ikra will get the job done and should work just fine. So the first thing we're going to start going over is the actual dragons now that go into the dragons of this dragon tribal deck. Now, after you cut out all the red from your regular dragon tribal deck, there is a whole lot of room to explore the wild west of cards out here. So the first thing we're going to go over is the dragons that have dragon tribal synergy that aren't in red. And there is, unfortunately, very few of those. There are 3 big ones, of course, and these are the Fate Reforged Tarkir Legendary Dragons. Of course, the 3 that don't have red in them are Dramoka, the Eternal, Ojutai, Soul of Winter, and Silumgar, the Drifting Death. All of these 3 legendary creatures have very powerful effects that trigger when dragons attack. So the more dragons you have, the better they are, better for your entire strategy overall. Ideally, what I would really like is to be able to give these dragons partners so that they could be the commander between Dramoka and Silumgar. You've got the 4 colors covered. And if your play group would let you have those 2 count as partners to be your commanders, great, do that. But odds are against them letting you do that because that's very, very powerful. Have those 2 dragons in your command zone the whole time. So we're just going to work under the assumption that we're not going to get that. So the first 3 dragons that should always go into this deck: Dramoka, Ojutai, Silumgar. Dramoka, of course, you bolster 2 whenever a dragon attacks. So one of your creatures gets +2/+2 permanently anytime dragon attacks. Awesome. Ojutai freezes down enemy creatures when it attacks. Great. Silumgar, all opponent's creatures get -1/-1 per attacking dragon. So 3 or 4 attacking dragons, and you're wiping your opponent's board most of the time. Awesome. So those 3 are first, and they're not only are they good in a vacuum, of course they actually get better with the more dragons that are on the board. So the next tribal dragon that we're going to be able to include in this deck is from one of the commander decks, from the Ur Dragon deck. It's actually a white dragon that's Scale Lord Reckoner, and it makes it so that anyone trying to single target one of your dragons, you get your own stuff destroyed, they get their stuff destroyed. When Scale Lord Reckoner becomes the target of a spell or ability, you get to blow up a permanent that the controlling player controls, and that's awesome. Makes your dragons very, very less susceptible to single target attacks, which is great since almost every one of your creature spells is going to be some kind of bomb. People are really going to want to get them removed, and if they don't want board wipe, they'll have to use single targets, and Scale Lord Reckoner is a great way to protect those. And there is actually a brand new Dragon Tribal card from the new Kamigawa Neon Dynasty set, and that is the Dragon Kami Reborn, or the Dragon Kami's Egg. It is a great card advantage engine, and it lets you get some big creatures out for free. Problem is that it broadcasts really heavily, and before it can go off, it does create a whole lot of opportunity for it to get itself removed, which lets you potentially lose a lot of powerful cards. So it's one of those risk-reward cards that if it goes off, great. If not, not great. The next batch of dragons is essentially the Elder Dragons. Is one of the places where you'll find a lot of dragons without red in them that are actually very powerful and playable. Not maybe less the original Elder Dragons. Like, I probably wouldn't recommend running Chromium to pay 8 mana and an upkeep of 3 for flying Rampage 2 on a creature. Certainly the new versions of all of the Elder Dragons from Core Set 2020, where we had the Chromium that can turn itself into a 1/1, unblockable, untargetable, where we had all of those other new versions of them are Katie Sabbath, one that lets your creatures do damage equal to toughness and do wall-based activities. Then there's also all of the Elder Dragons from sets like Strixhaven, where we had the blue-green and the white-black Silver Quill and Quadrix, all of those dragons. Now, none of them are particularly tribal in that they don't really have synergy with other dragons, because each of them are such big bombs on their own, they're all kind of a small win con in and of themselves. So having those in there, especially with all the things that you're going to run to reduce their costs, like Morophon, like some of the other cards I'm going to talk about, if you resolve one and it sticks for a couple of turns, you're in pretty good shape. So anything that says Elder Dragon, of course, all of the Elder Dragons from Dragons of Tarkir, the versions of the ones we talked about earlier, Dramoka, Silumgar, Ojutai, all fantastic, all incredibly strong. So great, great cards to run. Any Elder Dragon. And in addition to the Elder Dragons, the other dragons that function very similarly to them are the ones from the Invasion block. Dromar, he's not technically from the Invasion block, it's from Planar Chaos, but Teneb the Harvester is one of these. There are so many of them. And let's see. There we go. Treva, Varash, all of those very, very good dragons. Very strong in and of themselves. There's a few other key dragons we'll take a look at. There is Imarith, the Desert Doom, from the Forgotten Realms set recently. This is a very difficult to target dragon, and also is a great card advantage source, which you might not have a lot of in a deck like this. So Imarith, worth taking a look at. And one of the super sneaky win con condition dragons is Skitterix, the Blight dragon. This is the dragon with Infect. Now, of course, Infect at your commander table may suffer a lot of hate, but since we're playing a really, really goofy theme here, I feel like it's totally safe to run Skitterix in a deck like this, because you've got to do a whole lot to really hit the table and go with a dragon like Skitterix. This is one of the places where it feels alright. There is also all of the dragons from Kamigawa, except of course the red ones. There is the original Kamigawa cycle, like Kakusho, which has one of the best effects ever. Kakusho was banned in Commander for a long time. So those are great. All of the new Kamigawa legendary dragons are great, since they all have on-death effects. It means that while they're on the table, they of course have the threat of just being a gigantic flying creature and all the problems that poses. Then if somebody kills them, great, they're going to do something for you there also. So they're going to have fantastic effects and make people think twice about board wiping or killing off dragons, especially if you have those and dragons that are imposing while alive. Creates some interesting choice dynamics for folks. One of the other slots is, and these two, I guess we'll do both of these, and these are the two planeswalkers that the deck feels alright to run, since you can't run any Sarkans because every Sarkan is red, but you can run. This is another Forgotten Realms Dungeons and Dragons card, and that's the Grandmaster of Flowers. He's Planeswalker, and he grows up to be a dragon. He's got a whole lot of neat, interesting combat tricks to make it so opponent's creatures can't block, your creatures can't be blocked. So some really cool stuff there. And then, of course, it turns into a dragon. Awesome. Even better. And the other Planeswalker options, there are multiple versions of this character, and that's Ugin, the Spirit Dragon. Of course, core Ugin is a little weird for this deck because he wants a colorless deck, but most of the deck is not colorless because of his board wipe effect. Of course, into an empty board, great. It does have spot removal with the Ghost Fire Bolts, and of course the ultimate, if you resolve it, great. So, even though it doesn't benefit or do anything from the tribal standpoint, just by how good it is in a vacuum, totally worth running. Those are the two Planeswalkers that I recommend. And that pretty much covers the dragons themselves that I want to recommend. Now, in addition to all of them being very powerful dragons, most of them are legendary. So if you wanted to lean into that aspect, you could run stuff that does legendary benefits as well. Stuff like, I was going to say Bard class, then I realized Bard class is red. So, but any cards that really have good synergy with legendary effects do have the ability to go really well in here, because so many of the good non-red dragons are legendary too. Some good example would be things like Day of Destiny, Heroes Podium, Double Major, anything like that would be an excellent way to capitalize on the fact that most of your deck is going to be legendary creatures, in addition to being dragons. Now, I am going to go over a few of the tribal staples that I think are very important to this deck because they circumvent this deck's weakness, a lot of which is color dependencies and high costs. So these are cards that really help to try to circumvent that. First one is Cryptic Gateway, which is an artifact that lets you tap 2 untapped creatures to put a creature into play that shares a type with them. So if you have 2 dragons out, you can instant speed tap 2 dragons, get 1 more into play. Of course, a great instant speed plan as well. So if you have a bigger dragon to play, you have 2 of your smaller ones out, wham, there it goes, gets out, easy, fast. On the exact same vein is Bell-Based Portal, an artifact that lets you choose a creature type, and then for 3 mana, tap it, cheat it into play. Great. Herald's Horn cuts colorless off the cost of the creature, and gets you some card advantage, lets you reveal the top, put those into your hand. There's Urza's Incubator, which just knocks 2 colorless off the top of the cost of all of them, and since all the dragons are such a high cost, good. There's also Dragon's Horde, which is a traditional mana rock, but also will let you draw cards as you play dragons, which is fantastic. So all of those are some of the best cards to include that have some generic tribal interaction, but will also really help deal away with some of the dragon's weaknesses. And the last batch of cards I'm going to go over are some things that will be beneficial to this deck in other ways, other than just being necessary mana reducers, but are things like removal, ramp, things of that nature, or have weird alternate win cons to help capitalize on this deck's strength. The first one is the board wipe that this deck really loves, and that's Crux of Fate. It's a board wipe that can destroy specifically non-dragon creatures from Paperforge. Paperforge has a lot of great cards for this deck because it's such a set that cares about dragons and interacts with all colors. So we get to stay away from red using those cards. Crux of Fate, one of the best. Next one is Fearsome Awakening, which is a good reanimate spell that if it targets a dragon, the dragon comes back bigger. So if you've got ways to get dragons in the yard early, essentially 5 mana to play a creature that would normally cost 7 or 9 mana, but only cares about having 1 color, and then also gets you to have the creature come out larger. Win-win there. Next is an augmenting creature, and that's Dragon's Disciple. It's a small creature, which you don't necessarily always have a lot of, and it gives all of your dragons Ward 1, which just doesn't do a whole lot to people intent on targeting for things, but does kind of slow down your opponent's procedures. And since it's Ward, you get to ask people who try and kill it with the last of their mana if they pay the 1 after the spell's on the stack, and people will sometimes just forget, and they'll lose their spells. So that's another great one. Another non-dragon creature that I like in this deck is from Dragons of Tarkir, and that's the Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. It's a ramp fixer, does a great job of getting you more mana faster, and then once you've got that Formidable online, it basically just casts Biorhythm. And Biorhythm is banned in Commander, which tells you how powerful it is, and with the amount of outgoing damage this deck has the ability to produce, the odds that resolving that ability will kill someone or put you in a position to win almost immediately, phenomenal. Next is Glorious Sunrise from the recent Innistrad set. It's just a great catch-all card. It's great in any deck that can run green, to be perfectly honest, but almost all of the modes are really useful here because Overrun is great for dragons. If people have flying blockers, giving them trample, great. Card drawing is excellent. Ramp is excellent. And of course, throwaway life gain if you've got nothing else to do. Always something. So that's a card that's really useful here. The next one is, it's another Planeswalker, but I don't treat it like a Planeswalker because it's more of just an attackable enchantment. That's Kiora Behemoth Beckoner from War of the Spark. It lets you draw cards basically anytime you play a dragon for creatures power 4 or greater, and will also let you untap lands. with her power. So she's really good at getting you some of that extra ramp, getting you some card advantage. And the last one is going to be Rishkar's Expertise. It's a really, really big card draw spell with a follow-up of dropping a card from your hand. Now, it is only 5 mana or less, and since so many of the dragons cost 6, you won't always be able to get a dragon onto the board with that. There are plenty of cards in the deck that will be on that lower end of the curve, especially a lot of your ramp artifacts like the Cryptic Gateway cost 5, so great for getting out some of those cards after you draw them. And like I said, there's also all of the really, really common tribal cards, especially the past few years that we've come out with. All of the Kindred spells, Kindred Discovery, Kindred Dominance, the 4 that you've got access to, all really great choices to run. All of the artifact anthems that you would have access to, Vanquisher's Banner, Obelisk of Erd, all of those things that you can get, whichever one of those you want to run, just whether or not you want to run more tribal supplement cards versus just more cards in the tribe. There are still plenty of dragons in these colors that I did not go over, and you can definitely go check those out. But some of my favorite dragons are in this category that I'm not going to talk about just because they're goofy. Things like Mist Dragon, Catacomb Dragon, the ones from Mirage, a whole lot of weird places that dragons exist that you can pull from to get strange creatures into this deck. I mostly went over the ones that are going to be really powerful and do a good job of actually helping you win games. But if you've got a favorite non-red dragon that you're in love with, feel free to add it to this deck. And then just put in whatever tribal supplementary stuff that you want, because there's a lot of that out there. And I will go ahead and put up a deck list that I've created for this deck. But if you like the idea of having a non-red dragon tribal deck, definitely start with some of the stuff that I've got over here, and I think you'll have a really good time playing that. And it's always great to surprise somebody with when you show up with one of your gimmicky decks. Say, hey, here is my dragon tribal deck, and then you never play a red card, and great. But thanks so much for hanging out. Like I said, this one was a little bit shorter. We'll have some more traditionally weird gimmicky stuff sometime soon. And if you've got an idea for a gimmicky deck, feel free, as always, to leave it in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'm MC Squared here with Zulu's Board Game Cafe. And don't forget to check us out at zulusgames.com for all of your Magic card needs. And have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much. Bye.